Welcome back to A Lifetime of Mafia Tales. Today, Sal and I talk about the Bonanno crime family boss, Joe Massino. Joe Massino worked his way up from the bottom to the top of the Bonanno family. Joe Massino's mentor was Philip Rastatelli, who was the boss at one time and would later go on to appoint Massino to be the next boss. Joe built the family up very strong and took pride in his work. Joe was always one step ahead of the feds. In the end, they got him to become an informant, though. Sal talks about his encounters with Joe Massino and what crimes they did. We are also joined by a very special guest, Gary Jenkins. He has a podcast called Gangland Wire. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon. Afternoon, guys. How you guys doing?
Good.
Well, today we got something special for everybody. We got a guest by the name of Gary Jenkins. He introduced me and Sal, and he's the one that sparked this whole relationship between me and Sal, doing a show together, starting a podcast and everything. But we're going to go into talking about Joe Massino today, the boss of the Bonanno crime family that became an informant. Sal had some connections with him, and Gary's going to be doing I believe a show or a documentary series, some kind of on Joe Massino as well. So, Sal, take us back to when you first met Joe.
So I got to go back to 72 or 73. It could only be 73, actually, in 74, because I was partners with Foxy Girotti. That's the guy that Tommy DeSimone murdered. And Girotti was under Gotti, and I was under Cataldo. And one day, Cataldo said, "Look, you got to go do me a favor for a friend of mine." Okay, what's the favor? Well, they don't always give you all the detail, okay? But the idea was, okay, I'm going to do a favor for Joe Massino, which I met back then, okay? He was friends with Cataldo. And then we come to find out that Foxy's going to go with me, and Gotti approved. And this is before those guys, Cataldo and Gotti, were made members. So they were under the other capos. Gotti was under Fatico Brothers, and Cataldo was under Joe Brancata. This was after Colombo was shot, and Joe Brancata was the acting boss. So I said, "What do we got to do?" So Cataldo took me to Joe Massino's catering restaurant deli and said, "Look, this is the situation." I believe it was for Rusty, the boss, Rastelli.
Yep.
He had a trial coming up, and they wanted this witness, to get a beating. So they gave us the address, and Foxy and I went and we scoped out where this house was. And I went back and told him, Cataldo and Joe Massino, okay, because we had to find the house. Then it was sort of like a robbery. You got to give somebody a beating, then you got to have a getaway. You just can't walk up there, give somebody a beating, and leave your car with license plates exposed. So it was like a robbery in a sense. So we got to figure out what we were going to do. We're just going to give this guy a beating, and they instructed us to break his legs with bats. So Foxy and I had to go to the sports store, and in those days, I said to Foxy, "What do you want to get? What kind of equipment?" He said, "What are you going to get?" "I got to get Mickey Mantle because that guy's a slugger. Get the Mickey Mantle back." And he said, "Well, I'm going to get Pete Rose because he's a hitter, and we're going to hit this guy." Okay. So about a week goes by. We watch the guy come out, and they gave us this information. This guy would come out. He worked for the post office. He'd come out with his U.S. Post Office jacket on. And it's probably like the winter. Must have been 73 or 4. I don't remember exactly. So we scoped it out. We went back. Foxy told Gotti, "Tomorrow morning we're going to give this guy a beating because he's a witness and he can't testify." It must have been against Rastelli, I think. I'm not sure. We didn't ask in those days. They said, "Here's the address." We didn't even know the guy's name. All they said was he wears a U.S. Post Office jacket. So we're hanging out in a stolen car. Now we got a stolen car on the same block where we're beating this guy up. After we give the guy the beating, we're going to drive 2-3 blocks, drop the stolen car off, and get into a rented car. This was the same type of thing we did on heist. So this guy comes out of the house, and Foxy and I are walking on the street, one on each side of the street, and we rush up there, and we hit this guy, beat him to the ground. I mean, really beat this guy bad. And I could hear the guy moaning, and Foxy's breaking his legs. And then we go away. Then, about a day or two later, Cataldo says to me, hey, we got to go see Joe Massino. And he says, you know, you gave the wrong guy a beating. I said, what are you talking about? The guy came out of the house with the U.S. Post Office jacket on. It was like an Eisenhower jacket, short jacket. He says, you beat up the father who was walking the dog. Oh, I mean, I felt, you know, pretty bad in those days. Of course, I mean, I wasn't going to go to confession, but the bottom line was Gotti came back and said to us, you did okay because the family disappeared. They just upped and moved out. The next day or two, they were gone. Okay? And, of course, I don't know what happened at the trial. But this is what happened with Messina, and it was the first thing, you know, we ever did for this guy. And I didn't even know who Messina was at the time, that he was vying, you know, to get made in the Bonanno family. And it was a favor. In those days, we were 28 years old. If they told us go break down the building, we went and broke down the building.
Well, I can add a little bit into that, and then I could pass it off to Gary to ask some stuff like, so to give a little background, Joe Massino, back when you met him, he was coming up, and his mentor was, you know, Phil Rastelli, and, you know, he was involved with, you know, Joe and Phil were involved with hijackings, loan sharking, and gambling. And Joe eventually did earn some respect by taking the hit that Paul Castellano had ordered against Vito Borelli because he had disrespected him, calling him like a chicken man. And, you know, so Joe Massino took this favor and took the guy out. And another way that he really got made his bones in that family as well was, you know, he was a mastermind on the Carmine Galante hit. He was even the driver there. There was 3 other gunmen that went in, and then, you know, he was the driver. And so, I mean, he was involved with so much stuff in the early days, and, you know, he had taken out so many guys, doing so many hits. And, you know, when Phil became the official boss, you know, he took Joe up there right with him to be right there at the top, because after that, Joe would go on to be the boss when Phil, I think he may have died in prison, Phil Rastelli. Do you know Gary or Sal?
I think he did
so.
die.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. So what would you like?
You know, that family was looked down upon because the old man, Joe Bonanno, decided he was going to be the first guy ever to retire and go off, you know, go off to Arizona to hang out. And eventually nobody liked him because he actually even wrote a book. And I was friends with the guy who played him in the movie Honor Thy Father. I became friends with Joe Bologna and his wife, Renee Taylor, in Hollywood years and years later. So, you know, the Bonanno family was looked down upon. And at one point, it was the smallest, tiniest family. Of course, when Messina took it over, much changed. Much changed.
Yeah, it did. I mean, they were getting involved with, you know, when Donnie Brasco had infiltrated, they had
years later, yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that was another reason for the Bonanno family to be shunned away from the other 4, because of the fact that they had this guy in their family for like 6 years, and then they kind of shunned them out. And I believe that's when Joe Massino started selling drugs to the Bonanno family, and they got deeply involved with that because the other rackets they couldn't get involved with. But what do you got, Gary? What would you like to ask Sal?
Well, Sal, Joe was a pretty good money maker, from what I understand.
Oh yeah.
Now, did he have anything to do with that? Rusty Rastelli had lined up that organization of all the lunch wagon drivers.
The roach coaches.
Yeah. Right. Did Joe have anything to do with that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, he had a whole cadre of, you know, roach coaches that were all over Queens and Long Island. So when I gave that guy a beating back in the early 70s, I kind of lost track. But after I got out of jail in the late 70s, Cataldo brought me to see him again. By this time, he had expanded in all kinds of business, but I didn't pay attention. And the only thing Cataldo said, listen, you got this big chop shop business. I didn't have just one little building. When I did things, I didn't do it like on a small basis. I got 1 building, 2 buildings, 3 buildings, 5 buildings. I bought commercial buildings, and I had chop operations going on. So I needed a lot of car thieves. So I go to meet Massino one day. He's, I got this good kid who's a great car thief. I go, yeah. I go, what's his name? His name is Goldie. Okay, send him over to my shop. So this guy Goldie comes to my shop. He said, I'll get as many cars as you want. And he turned out to be a really good car thief, because in those days, I could order a Chevy, a Monte Carlo, but I had special customers who would buy, say, a wrecked powder blue Monte Carlo. And that customer, a body shop, I want a nice Monte Carlo that's exactly blue, like the one I just bought that was wrecked. The guy would take the front, put it on, he didn't have to paint it. Well, Goldie was great at getting the exact. He worked with a great deal of specificity. I had to teach him that word. I go, it's got to be specific. If I tell you a blue, triple blue is blue outside, blue seats, and a blue roof. So Goldie was great. So for a year or two, I never knew Goldie's name. And guess what? That was 1978. I didn't know Goldie's name till 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know who you're working with, especially back then, you know. But I know he was a German as well. Remember, we have discussed, and
yeah,
he was just an associate of Joe Massino.
But he did a lot. He did a lot with Massino, Gary. If you look into him, he wound up going to jail for Massino once, and then the feds approached him, say, "Look, years ago you went to jail, Massino. Now we're going to put him in jail, and you're going to go too." And he finally flipped, but it was like years and years later.
Yeah.
What about his relationship with was it handsome Sal Vitale, his brother-in-law? Did you know anything about that relationship? They were really close, I understand.
Good-looking Sal. It was his brother-in-law.
Yeah,
it was his brother-in-law, and then Sal Vitale was just a couple of years younger than Massino. Massino was like 2 years older than me. I think he was born in 43. I'm 45. So good-looking Sal was like Massino's brother-in-law, and he got him deeply entrenched, in the mob life. Eventually, he participated in murders. I mean, this is what happens, the escalation of crime. You start out with a little bit of crime, Gary, like you were a police officer, detective. Guys start out with a little tiny petty crime. Before you know it, they've moved up to sophisticated crime, violent crime. And that's what Vitale did, yeah.
Yeah, and I could add a little bit onto that. So Sal Vitale, he became the acting boss of the Bonanno family when Joe Massino went to prison. And then, the only reason that they were able to communicate and get message across from Joe Massino from prison was because Sal was considered his family. So they would be able to meet, and they would meet in the prison rooms, and he'd pass off orders and stuff. But they were pretty close, and he would eventually flip on Joe Massino. And I mean, I can go into that and tell you guys what happened, because I did some research as well today. And the situation was that Sal, he had gotten busted for some kind of crime, and he didn't get charged, was sentenced, to a big sentence. It was a very short sentence for the length. And so Joe Massino, being him, he was paranoid. He was worried. He had a bunch of red flags going up. And so he gave the orders to basically cut him off from the family and not talk to him and not have anything to do, kind of just take a step back and really analyze what to do. And so he didn't like that. And then Sal, and then I believe at the time as well, they had 7 informants cooperating against Joe Massino during this trial, and they were all testifying. So I think it was pretty easy for Sal to go ahead and make that decision as well, because from what I researched, they said his was the most important testimony that put Joe Massino away that day, and he got quite a bit of time. And then they brought him back up for another murder, and then that's when he was facing the whole death penalty case. And so with that case that they brought to him, he had murdered another guy in the Bonanno family that they had evidence of. And so Joe Massino decided that, this is when he's going to cooperate. And so that's when, the whole family and everything else got indicted, a lot of guys. But
Sal, Joe Massino seems like he's he's got a lot of connections and makes connections with people. Was he that kind of guy? You know, some people are that kind of guy. Was that kind of guy that, you know, here's something here for you, here's something over there for you, and work with other families? He was a fixer kind of a guy and a connector?
He was really close with Gotti. And the only way I knew this is because Cataldo knew of the Messina-Gotti connection. Well, after they got made, you know, Gotti, Massino, and Gotti got made, you know, after 1976. Okay, Gotti was in prison till 77. Well, after Joe Messina got made, Cataldo was tight with him. Okay, and in the summer of 78, 77, 78, Cataldo thought I wanted to get made. And he said, look, we got a piece of work. I go, what piece of work? We got to take this guy out. Joey Messina and I, we need to kill this guy. Now, I testified about this particular murder against Massino in federal court, but I didn't know the guy's name. This is just the way it was. You know, when you're pulled in and said, look, you get ready, you can get made, all you got to do is go dig a grave, Cataldo told me. So I went out to Long Island. I spent all night by myself digging a grave. I got blisters. And I went back home, and he says, wait for us to call you. We're going to kill this guy, and you'll come pick him up, and you'll go take him out to the Hamptons, and you'll bury him. Okay, that's all I got to do, because I was still on the fence. So like, okay, I can get made. This is 77, 78. I wasn't disenchanted at that moment because there was a lot going on, and I was paying attention. So what happens is, I remember it was in the fall. I don't hear from him the next day. And I had dug this grave. I had to make sure I had a rope. They told me to do it 6 foot. I'm only 5'9". So I dug the grave, and I had to pull myself up out of that grave. So I'm at the football field 2 days later, and Cataldo comes over there. Now, you got to know how important the football field was in my life. First of all, I coached these kids. I had a Gotti. Peter Gotti's kid played for me. My kid played. Greg Ryder, who was a drug dealer with Gotti, his kid played. Even Frankie Gotti, the kid that got killed on a mini bike, was on my team temporarily. And it would be on a Saturday morning. It was Pop Warner. Cataldo comes over and whispers to me, you better go fill up that grave. I go, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? He's, last night, Joey and I, we got that guy. I go, I'll see you after the game. So then I go and meet him. I said, what in the world went on? Well, he said, we couldn't get him where we wanted to get him. And we had to kill him, you know, in somebody's apartment. I think he said it was a guy named Tutti Franzese. So Cataldo was hiding in the closet. He gave me all the details. He was bragging about it. And Messina brings the guy into the apartment, and Cataldo jumps out of the closet and strangles him with a wire. And Tutti Franzese, they take him and they dump him in Long Island City. So they didn't care. Now, I didn't even know the guy's name, but I testified against Massino. It had to be years later. I don't remember how many years. But I never knew the guy's name they murdered, but they were bragging about it. And that's one of the things, you know, that I had to do as a favor to Cataldo and Massino.
Yeah. And, oh, go ahead, Gary.
Joe, like, this is kind of a repeated pattern of his. He like set up the murder of the three capos. So right. he like recruited the guys, set the scene, and it sounds like the same kind of a plan. You know, they get them in there, and then somebody steps in and been hidden in there, and then steps out and said, "Hey, this is a holdup," and then starts shooting them. So this is that had the earmarks of Joe Massino. He was a planner, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a plotter and a planner. He was meticulous at things he did. I will tell you this. I can't tell you right now, but I got a friend who was in the government, and recently he told me about some secret proceedings and who represented Massino when he flipped. Now, I'll find out when we can tell you, okay? Mm-hmm. But I know the guy who represented him because Judge Weinstein, a famous judge in Brooklyn, ordered this particular man to represent Massino when he had already flipped. And then so this guy's a friend of mine for 38 years, and he was in law enforcement. So I'll find out if I can tell, or maybe we'll bring him on, get him on your show. And he's writing a book also, and he's a very famous guy as far as a prosecutor. Okay, so I just found this stuff out, and recently he even told me more secret stuff. So we'll see if I can talk to him. We're going to get him on our show on a Sunday morning, and then we'll hope maybe we'll get him on your show.
Okay.
But I'll find out if he's ready to talk about it. I got to respect him because he gave me confidential information, but it was really about Massino. I don't know if you knew that did you know that Joe Massino surrendered $12 million in gold to the government?
I read something about that. He surrendered. They let him keep some money, but he surrendered a lot of money too.
Yeah.
You know, another funny story about Joe Massino was there was an incident that occurred that they had planted a bug in one of his social clubs or his business, his restaurant, some kind of operation that he had ran. And so the feds put it in there. They snuck it in there because Joe had a janitor that would come and clean, an older guy. And so the feds were watching him, and they were thinking, okay, how can we get the guy's keys? So they found out that this janitor likes to, go to the bar and drink right after every morning. So they went in there, and after he had walked up to go to the bathroom, I guess he left his keys there. They got the keys and had a replica one made already. They went into the, Massino's and put that bug in there. And then after, I guess one of the agents that had placed it in there, he was told, hey, by his chief or someone from above, that you need to go out there and get it. And so he goes in there and he knocks on this, I think it was a storefront because he had just knocked on it, or he went in there and they just like instantly grabbed this agent, put him against the wall. And then Joe Massino's like, hey, no, that's just, one of the cops, one of the cops, put him down, leave the guy alone. And so he said, here, I think this is what you're looking for. And Joe had the bug in his hand, and he he gave it to him, and he said, okay. And that, because, he walked out and that was it. I mean, he was always one step ahead. He always knew their names, all the feds' names and everything. So just as much as they were on him, he was doing the same thing.
Yeah, he did some counterintelligence, but he was clever. There was no doubt.
Yeah.
Clever, but I mean, look what happened at the end. I mean,
right.
Terrible.
Yeah. Was he personality wise though? I mean, was he real, friendly, kind of overly friendly, almost, slap on your back kind of a guy?
Yeah, he was a jokester, and he had a good personality, a different personality than John Gotti. John Gotti was the quickest, wittiest guy you ever could be around. And when he got with another witty guy, it's like two comedians, And Massino was pretty clever and pretty quick. He was very responsive, and he liked to have a good time. He came to my Sinatra club a couple of times, but he wasn't the type of guy to sit there and play cards all night.
I think another good thing to bring up about what Joe Massino would be the whole Sonny Black thing. I mean, he killed Sonny Black, or he gave orders to do that because he brought Joe Pistone into the family. And on top of that, he also, the guy that introduced Sonny Black to Joe Pistone, he was another mob guy. His name was Anthony Mira, and Joe Massino had him taken out as well. So, I mean, do you know you want to go into a little bit more of that, Sal or Gary?
I didn't know those guys, Gary. I didn't know Mira.
Yeah. But you knew Sonny Black, right?
Yeah, occasionally I saw him. Yeah, he'd hang out at one of the nightclubs in Queens. There was certain nightclubs. There was a nightclub that was connected to a big hotel, and I'd go there with Cataldo, and we'd drink with him. But it wasn't something where you were conversing about business deals. Most of that stuff was very close, Gary.
Yeah. Joe wasn't a guy that bounced around a lot of joints and partied and had girlfriends and stuff, was he? No. Was he more of a home guy and business guy?
Not that I knew of. I didn't see him like that. In the days I knew Gotti, I never saw him go after a woman. From what I heard through Sammy Gravano was that he started to become a ladies' man at the end of his life. Yeah. So, things did change. I think Gotti had a big ego, and I think Massino had a big ego. from what I did hear from some agents, I think there was a conflict between the two of them towards the end.
After the Bonanno, I mean, after the Joe Pistone thing came out, were you still on? Were you on the streets then? After that information came out, because
No,
I understand.
I was gone. I was
Okay.
gone by that time. Yeah, I was in shock that the Pistone character. By the way, I did talk to the real Pistone when we did our Sinatra Club movie. I talked to him a couple of times. Nice guy, but I wasn't out there when all of that was happening. I wasn't surprised because I always said that law enforcement finally got a hold of technology, and and we can hear from a guy, Ed McDonald, about how wiretaps were placed inside the Gambino family residence. We'll hear about that soon on our show, so it'll be interesting. And I think you probably know a lot about that, Gary. But
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Well, another thing too, the feds were able to get Joe Massino for they went through his accounts. They went through his books, him and Sal Vitale's, their books on their businesses that they were operating, and they found there was a similar guy that popped up on their transactions. And so this guy was like a business owner, and he had been a part of, I believe, renting out spaces for parked cars. And so it was like a parking garage. And so Joe Messina's was laundering money from this. He was getting money because they would say that, oh, there's this many cars that had parked here this day, but it wasn't. And they would go on to find out that this guy, they could flip him. And so that was who they were able to flip by flipping the guy that was helping them arrange this money laundering scam, I suppose.
Interesting. After, you may have heard this from somebody else, Sal, I understand after this came out that Joe Massino gave out a lot of new rules, and he really encouraged people to make their sons, to make a blood relative, and always, you got to go back 2 generations to make sure who it is, and a lot of different rules like that. Did you hear anything about that? The new rules, the Pistone rules, we'd call them.
No, I didn't know that, but I read about it, and it made sense because a lot of guys wanted family in there because then there was less risk of, the problem that a lot of the public doesn't know is guys like me, guys that were making 20, 30, 40,000 a week, with drugs. And of course it was very secretive in the early 70s, mid 70s. We had the money, and not me. After a while, I saw through the mob. I could care less if they begged me to become a MAID member. It wasn't going to happen by 78, 79 because they were killing too many people. They were killing people for no reason. So, but what was happening was the drug dealers had the money power, and they used that money to influence the MAID guys to propose them. And all of a sudden, it's sort of like the guys that were football players taking steroids. It was phony. It was artificial. So the guys who were going up to get made, they didn't even murder anybody. So the old-fashioned rules were out the window. Just give a made guy a couple of 100,000. He'll say, oh, yeah, this kid's a good guy. Let's get him made. And so the value of made members changed.
Interesting. So Joe was, I have a question. Did you ever hear him? It was called Joe Bagels. You ever hear that? Okay.
Joey Bagels, no.
Yeah, I read that somewhere. It didn't sound quite right to me.
Yeah.
Big Joey.
Did he have a restaurant?
Oh, yeah. He had J&J. He had J&J, a deli and catering. Yeah, he wound up, I didn't pay attention to him, because I was with Cataldo, which was Colombo. So the only reason I would get any kind of interaction with him was really through Dominic Cataldo. Like when they murdered that guy, somehow they decided to murder this guy. I didn't even know his name. And I testified at Massino's trial. And I think he got acquitted of the murder, but convicted of racketeering. So, and I didn't know the guy's name. I think the government knew his name, but you know how it works at a trial. The government or law enforcement, FBI agents or detectives, they're never going to give witness information that he doesn't have. You can't, legally you can't do that.
Yeah.
So I just testified what I knew, and that was it. That's what I did on the Massino case. Didn't even want to do that, but the government had a hammer over my head. You got to testify at any trial that we want you to do. You did the judge, you did Massino, now you're going to do the Gotti trial. That's just the way it worked.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was going to ask you as well, Sal. I mean, we always do this. I mean, what is something that people can learn from Joe Massino? What he did, what was wrong? Like, why should someone not get involved with that?
Well, don't forget, he started in the street, because when I knew him, he wasn't a made guy. He might have been the last guy I ever thought that was going to be the head of a family, but he worked his way up. I mean, he ingratiated himself with Rastelli, and the other capos in the Bonanno family, which was really looked down upon back in the early 70s. And he started to build an army, and he made money, and he was a convincing guy. Much like Gotti, he was a good salesperson. Massino was a good salesperson.
Yeah, and look where he ended up. I mean, he ended up being on death row almost facing the death penalty, and then cooperating against all those people. And I mean, he went through a lot of stuff that, it's not a good route to go down, man, going into getting in the life of crime, huh, Gary?
But he became the boss of the Bonanno family before all that.
Right.
I mean, there's a price to pay.
Yeah. That was his quest.
Yeah.
The quest. And also remember that Gotti had moved up, by 85, Gotti was the head of the Gambinos, even though Vincent Giganti didn't like him, Casso didn't like him. But so, the Bonanno family was run by Massino, and Gotti's running the Gambino family. But the old mobsters, the old bosses, they didn't like those two guys. They really didn't. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how, the whole Donnie Brasco fiasco happened, and he got sucked in. I mean, look, you could be as sharp as a tax street guy, but did you see that coming? Massino probably never saw it coming.
No.
I don't know. And he was really paranoid after that, especially after that. And like Gary was saying, he shut down the social clubs. He shut down just any kind of having a lot of guys hanging out around. I mean, that was just not going to be allowed. And I believe they even said that when they referred to him, they pointed at the ear. You ever hear that, Gary?
Yeah, I read that.
That signals.
Just like the chin.
Yeah, that signals. Yeah, I think they got real. The two of those guys, Gotti and Massino, the public just believed it all. I mean, don't forget, here's a guy who was nobody in the early 70s, like Gotti, and all of a sudden, after Gotti was acquitted, which was March of 87, oh my God, there was so much media. We were just getting into online stuff, internet stuff, and he became a sensation. Gotti was a New York City, pop hero, pop culture hero, signing autographs for women that were getting married on, bottles of champagne. I mean, the guy was into it. A lot of people don't know that Gotti was sitting in a hotel one day with Angelo Ruggiero. I think I might have told you this, Adrian.
Mm-hmm.
They're sitting in this hotel, and all of a sudden these Secret Service come in, and they looked at Gotti and Ruggiero and they say, "Mr. Gotti, I'm sorry to say you have to leave this hotel." And he looked at him. We didn't do anything wrong. The president is coming in here, And I think it might have been, I'm not sure. I don't know. It might have been George Bush. I don't remember, but
probably.
Yeah, it was 80, maybe 86, 87, whoever the president was. Some Gotti in his, ultimate wisdom and comedic voice said, "Hey, just tell the president." He would always speak in third person. Tell him John Gotti said hello. Just like that.
Jeez, man. Yeah, that is a pretty funny story. I mean, you really don't think about, all those other ones. I mean, you have all these side stories and stuff, but
really.
To wrap up on Joe Massino, we should cover who he really put away, towards the end. I mean, he cooperated against his acting boss, Vinny Basciano.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So I mean,
I mean, he actually wore a wire in prison, Gary.
Oh, did he? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he had a wire on, and he convinced the guy who was the new boss to talk about a murder. I mean, who would even believe that? You know, that's something out of like a comic
fiction.
book.
Yeah, that's a comic book. Yeah, a good way to put it. That's crazy.
Yeah, so Massino did testify against him twice for the government, and that's when he helped get the murder conviction in 2011 is when that happened, and he's been in there since. I don't know if he's still who they have at the throne now, the Bonanno family. I don't know. I mean, any guesses?
The issue today is like, well, they got all these big heavyweight mob guys. Now the other guys in the street, they have no value because, 37 years ago when I flipped, I was right after Henry Hill. Oh my God, it was like, wow, this guy is going to come over to the other side, which was like a catch for the prosecutors, and all that U.S. government. But today you got so many guys out there giving information, you're not going to get anything special from them.
No.
Yeah, everybody knows him.
Plus, nobody's working on the mob anymore anyhow to speak of.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely not in Kansas City and a little bit in Chicago and Philly and New York. But outside of that, I don't think there's anybody's assigned to work on the organized crime unless it's narcotics.
Yeah. It's become very historical. And 8 years ago when I met my wife, I said, I don't want to do any of this talking. I don't want to do. And all of a sudden, when this Sopranos thing was found, when Sopranos was found by the young people that like Adrian's age, they didn't know how historical it was. And all of a sudden you got this whole massive population on Netflix watching organized crime and stuff. And so now it's in vogue. They want to hear these stories. I turned down doing a podcast 12 years ago. Oh my God, if I would have started 12 years ago, I would have had a whole bunch of people.
They call you Michael Franchise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Your money bucks.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You'd be at $1 million right now, $1 million plus. Well, Gary, did you want to ask Sal any more questions about Joe, or did we cover it?
I think this is good. I'm going to have to sit down and do a lot of, like you've done, do a lot of research, and then I'll plug Sal's comments in there, kind of back up what I find out to get some, the more granular detail. But I really appreciate, Sal, your comments and your stories. They're great stories. And, people like that personal story. I mean, there is something that makes, I can go out and research all day long and repeat it, regurgitate it. And I have a certain angle because I was, worked a mob, but then a guy that lived it, you just add a lot more credence to it. So I really appreciate you helping us out with this.
When we get Ed McDonald, this is the guy that I became friends with 37 years ago. And he's the guy that was in Goodfellas, who put Henry in the program. Well, he was the guy that put me in the program in '87. Well, I became friends with him. I gave him a part in the movie. He played a priest. So recently I called him, and he's going to come on a Sunday. We'll let you know.
Okay.
And Adrian will send you a link so you could listen to him because
he's
doing a book, and he would be great as a guest for you also.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you would be.
I'll talk to him about it and say, hey, Gary's a good guy, because he doesn't do a lot of interviews, but if you get him on there, I'm telling you, he's a wealth of information, and he's got some stuff to say. Oh my God. I told Adrian, I can't say it now, but amazing stuff that's just coming out now.
Yeah, cool. they'll all see. So, if anybody has seen the little clips as well, me and Gary, we did the Kansas City Mafia tour about back in March. I'm still putting the videos out because I put, one episode per week. And, I broke it down to like 12 pieces. I think I'm posted number 11. So I got 2 more left. So if you haven't seen those, check those out. And he's also, Gary, you check out Gary's channel. He's got an interview with Sal from probably last year. I think it came out
a year ago.
Yeah,
that was a year ago already. Wow,
at least.
Wow,
I know.
So yeah, check that out because that was the first one Sal did in quite a while at the time, like a podcast wise, or maybe the first appearance he made on a podcast.
I think it was. He told me it was. I caught him.
Well, we're going to go ahead, Gary, and move to another area soon, like January, when the political arena starts up about criminal justice. I'm going to talk about criminal justice, and you and I'll talk again, because it's a big issue in this country. I found out that 3 women a day get murdered, and my wife wants me to talk about that. So eventually, I don't need to keep talking about mafia stuff, although people like it.
I understand. Yeah.
But there's no value to me after a while.
Yeah, I understand.
Let's do something that makes a difference, you know?
It's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good stopping point. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. That wraps up the story of the Bonanno crime family boss, Joe Massino. Joe is another great example of someone who got deeply involved with the mafia life and it had a horrible outcome. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. At the end, a playlist will pop up of all of our other podcasts we've done in the past. You can find Gary's channel in the video description. Please subscribe to mine and Sal's YouTube channel if you want to get more videos like this. Also, please go over and subscribe to our Patreon channel as well. In the video description below, you can get an autographed copy of Sal's book, The Sinatra Club. You can also get a Sinatra Club movie ticket that's signed by Sal. There's another one called Dinner with the Mobster, another event he hosted in the past. It's signed. And our best and most hot-selling one is the Sinatra Club playing cards. These cards were played with by lots of high-ranking mobsters in Sal's old social club. Thank you again, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.